VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. The Vikings are 0-2. They were supposed to win week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 5-point favorites or so. Lost that game at home. They were supposed to lose last night, Thursday Night Football, which they indeed did, thanks to 4 turnovers and a generally flummoxing game from start to finish. It was exactly like the 2022 Eagles loss with a little bit more competence in the second half. Made it interesting in the final, 30 minutes of real-life TV time. But this is where we're at. 0-2, and it feels eerily similar to the 2021 campaign when they lost to the Bengals out of the gate and Dalvin Cook fumbled in overtime. Then the following week, tried to right the ship against the Cardinals. Greg Joseph misses a dinker field goal. Voila, you're 0-2. It feels a lot like that. So regrettably, we might have a season where the Vikings are chasing 500, hoping to wiggle in the back half of the playoffs because the Lions or the Packers are probably going to win this week. And between the two of them, they'll be 2-0. The Vikings will be 0-2. Who knows what the damn Bears will do. And regrettably, this guy might have been wrong about the 11-6 prediction. I'm not ready to call the season just yet because I still think the Vikings are a good football team, and we're going to get into that on this show. But make no mistake, it seems like the odds makers who had the team pegged at 8.5 wins all summer, it seems like those guys and gals are right, and this dude was wrong. Thankfully, there's 16 weeks to go, and we shall see. But let's start with this. You have 9 days to think about this. Against the Chargers at US Bank Stadium on September 24th is an absolute desperation game for your Minnesota Vikings. There is precedent for teams that get into an 0-2 hole to later visit the postseason. Since 1990, when the NFL expanded to 6 teams in the playoffs per conference, now there's 7. 11.5% of teams that start 0-2 make the postseason. But once you get into that 0-3 rut, there's only a handful ever that have done it. So the Vikings absolutely must beat the Chargers. They're not an easy team to beat. There's going to be offensive fireworks on both sides. The over-under will probably be wild for that game, and we shall see what the Chargers do this week and go forth. But the Vikings have done this to themselves, chiefly by losing to the Buccaneers in week 1. They've got to win in week 3, otherwise they're going to Carolina 0-3 with the Chiefs on deck, and you're looking at a big fat 1-4 or 0-5, and not good at all. So we know that there is the desperation game afoot. Thankfully, they have a mini bye week to prepare for it. I've struggled with this since I went to bed last night, trying to put my thumb on what is the deal here, and I can only come up with this. I think this is a relatively good football team, not elite, but about a 10-7 or 11-6 team if they stop fumbling the football. I think at this current moment, September 15th at about noon, the Vikings are a good football team that just fumbles a lot. And I know that really sounds like, well, what else is the guy going to say? He loves the Vikings. But if these types of fumbles, A, don't usually happen to the Vikings all the time, and B, don't happen to other teams at this breakneck pace. I think if there is a way to jettison the fumbles from the operation, this is actually a good football team. The defense looks a little bit improved, at least via, the secondary. The run game was gashed like none other. But I almost wish that the last 2 games have been utterly rotten, like Cousins can't get going, the defense looks the same as last year, because then you could just write them off and say, all right, they're probably going to lose the next blah, blah, blah games, and then we're looking at a sweet draft pick. But there's something good about the Vikings that's just becoming undone by these mind-boggling turnovers. So I'm gonna put that out there that I still believe this is a good football team, and there is a lot of precedent statistically for teams that have turnovers out of the gate. I think the Dallas Cowboys in 1993 had 7 turnovers in the first 2 weeks. They went 1-1, and they won the Super Bowl 4 months later. I don't think the Vikings are going to win the Super Bowl this year, but it's a parallel that there is indeed NFL precedent for teams doing dumb turnover shit out of the gate and then figuring it out. So we're going to hope that Kevin O'Connell has that up his sleeve. The next thing is the lack of rushing the football, even trying to do it, is just flummoxing. I don't get it. The Vikings rushing attempts and certainly rushing yards, it's the lowest in franchise history to start a season by far. The Vikings historically do like to run the football. Well, this year they're just flat out not doing it. I think they've run the ball 26 times, and that is in NFL history. That is the third fewest rushing attempts through 2 games to start a season ever. There's only 2 other teams, I can't remember who they are or were, that have done it fewer. But yeah, all they're doing is throwing the ball, which it has worked, but usually to keep the defense off the field, to keep the time of possession even or on par, you've got to be able to run the football a little bit. And the Vikings aren't even trying to do it. So we have this big sob story about, oh, we missed Dalvin Cook, even though he, for the most part, on a per-carry basis, sucked last year, besides the home run touchdowns. We have this narrative now that Alexander Mattison, we have blah, 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 we need to go sign Leonard Fournette. Madison's fumble was atrocious, but they're not even giving him the ball to figure out if he is good at this RB1 job. It's not happening. Now, thankfully for their sake, they're not going to play Vita Vea in Tampa Bay again, or the Eagles and that monster of a defensive line again until the playoffs, if they even get there. So the schedule will soften up per opponent's interior defensive line, so maybe that is what is the game plan has just been scrapped, because they're like, well, we're not even going to try to run the ball at these nose tackles and such. But it is so strange that they're not even factoring, and they're like, yeah, we're going to throw it 77% of the time, and you can go to hell if you don't like it. Normally, that's great, like on a video game or arena football league, but in the NFL, you don't have to do the old-style 1970s shit of running it more than you throw, but you have to run it a little bit to keep people honest and to keep the defense off the field. So I think somebody has to get that memo. These are historically low rushing attempts and rushing yards, and if you want to have a puncher's chance to either still win the division or wiggle into the postseason, you've got to run the football with some sort of efficiency. Next, I think last night was probably a de facto handing of the torch of the WR2 job from KJ Osborne, who had it for 2 weeks maybe, to Jordan Addison, who scored his second touchdown in 2 weeks, has 133 receiving yards through 2 games. It really doesn't matter because they do so many 3 wide receiver sets. Who is the WR2? But if it means getting Addison more targets than Osborne, then you better promote him. It's already settled that Addison is going to be more reliable. You saw that in living color last night when Osborne had 2 or 3 drops. Boom. You have to have Jordan Addison as WR2. You drafted him high. He's shown you the mettle in the first 2 games that I can do this. And Osborne's going to walk free agency next year, and we'll miss him because he's a real good dude. But Addison, they got the draft pick right here. You've seen them exploit defenses to the tune of 2 bomb touchdowns. It's time to put Addison at WR2 and give him the targets justifiably. So, Jefferson gets his 12 or whatever it is. Make sure Addison's getting 8 or 9. Don't let those go to Osborne anymore because he's unfortunately proven he's not as dynamic as Addison. So welcome to the party, Jordan Addison. You are the next really, really good Vikings wide receiver in a long line of about a dozen, from Randy Moss, Justin Jefferson, Percy Harvin, Chris Carter, Jake Reed, Anthony Carter, Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, John Gilliam, Ahmad Rashad, Sammy White. Who am I missing? Did I get them all? All right, the next thing is, this isn't, so it will shock you to know that I am of the opinion that Kirk Cousins has played quite well in these 2 games. The numbers support it. He's had a couple of fumbles. Those sucked. It's nature of the beast sometimes. But I want to get this out in the open. This guy, Kirk Cousins, is in a contract year. He is not committed to the Vikings beyond this season. And if you are one of those folks who is ready to be done with Kirk and into the Kirk Cousins experiment in Minnesota, this is how the season would start to get your wish. Well, you could have seen it coming from 1 trillion miles away, that if the Vikings were going to start 0-2, Cousins was still going to be good. He was still going to have 750-something yards and, 6 touchdowns through 2 weeks. A marvelous stat line. I tabulated those numbers, whatever exactly they are. And only like a dozen quarterbacks in NFL history have put up these numbers as is through 2 weeks. And there's only 2 other guys that have a losing record through those games, 1994 Drew Bledsoe and 2020 Matt Ryan. So Kirk Cousins is holding up his end of the bargain while the Vikings somehow are utilizing fumbles to lose the games. And at some point, the Vikings coaching staff and general manager are just going to be like, you know what? This is 6 seasons with Cousins. It hasn't worked out. We're going to go in a different direction. And good for them. It's probably time for a change. And if you want that script, this is precisely how it would start. The Vikings are finding ways to lose games while Cousins is performing quite admirably. And I don't think it will matter in the end. If they go 8-9 and Cousins wants 40 to 45 million, I don't think they're going to pay it to him. They'll take whatever draft pick they have and invest it in this robust upcoming draft class. But that is the takeaway. If you want to be done with Cousins, starting 0-2 is exactly the way that it would start out in general. Let's see. What else is there? I think on defense, besides DeAndre Swift running the same play over and over and gashing the defense, and Jalen Hurts doing his bullshit goal line 4th and 1, 3rd and 1 sneak every time that it's applicable, the Vikings need to put some beef on the interior of the defensive line when they're in relatively obvious run situations. I think Khyiris Tonga has only played like 15% of defensive snaps. He's the largest, roundest guy on the defense. And when DeAndre Swift is wreaking his havoc last night, it was just a couple guys up front of the line and then a bunch of linebackers, and they just kept saying, well, you're not going to stop this. We're going to keep doing it. And good for them. That's what they should have done. That's what Mike Zimmer wanted to do for however many years. So I don't think they have to go out and sign a bunch of free agents, but using the players that you have, the beef eaters, might be necessary at times if a team decides that we're going to have a drive with 14 plays and we're going to run it 13 of those. You might want to put some bigger guys in the middle of the defensive line. I know that they didn't want to give up a huge play to Devonta Smith or A.J. Brown. But at some point, you got to just say, all right, well, we'll trust our corners to do their damnedest because every time this Swift guy is touching the ball, he's getting 7 yards. You got to use the beef that you have. All right, and then I'm going to leave you with this speech. I wrote about this on Vikings territory. I think I hinted at it with Josh Fry on Wednesday. And I'm going to keep saying this until it's no longer relevant. The way the schedule is situated, the Vikings need to be 4-4 by Halloween. And what the hell does that mean? That means 4 wins and 4 losses by the time we get to Halloween. And right now they're 0-2, which pretty much means they just need to win 4 of their next 6 games to be in pretty good shape, assuming these stupid-ass fumbles stop. Why do I say that? Well, the schedule after Halloween really opens up in terms of winnable games. Right now, we're in the middle of this murderer's row. I'll go through it right now. So in these 6 games, the Vikings need to find a way to win 4, and it'll be up to you to decide which 4 those will be. At home against the Los Angeles Chargers, at the Carolina Panthers, at home against the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, on the road at Soldier Field against the Bears, at home against the 49ers, and at the Green Bay Packers. Those are the next 6 games. They need 4 wins at least out of that to get to 500 by Halloween. Here is what happens after Halloween for 5 games. I can't remember if it's 6 weeks, 5 games. The Atlanta Falcons, the New Orleans Saints, the Denver Broncos, the Chicago Bears at home, and on the road at the Raiders. That is the mushy, good part of the schedule. If the Vikings, if they effectuate my little plan here, it will mean that they have gone 4-2 in the last 6 weeks with the Falcons, Saints, Broncos, Bears, and Raiders on the horizon. That is not a real difficult allotment. And you'll have Kirk Vember when he's at his best. It's hard to believe he could be played better than he is now. And if you're 4-4 and you go into those 5 games, if you figured out that you're a pretty good football team that no longer has fumbleitis, there is a way to escape 4-4 in that 5-game slot at about 8-5 or so, which would situate you pretty well. Who knows what the division would look like? But that is my mantra. I challenge you guys and gals to pull out the Vikings schedule and look at it. If they can be 4-4 by Halloween, then they will play the Falcons, Saints, Broncos, Bears, and Raiders. And then after that, the Bengals. That'll be a loss on the road. And then you have the Lions, Packers, Lions. And anything can happen in those games if you're about 8-5, 9-6, something like that. And may the best team win. All right, that's all I got. 0-2 is never fun, but we've been here before. The 2008 Vikings started 0-2 and later reached the postseason, got beat by you guessed it, Eagles. But that's the only time in Vikings history that they've started 0-2 and later reached the postseason. That's all I got for this week. We'll talk to you Monday. Skol, baby.